This week we continue the Kevaḍḍha Sutta, which we started last week. The Digha Nikaya, Long Discourses, number 11. And we resume exploring the sutta, where we saw how Kevaḍḍha, this householder who came in to the Buddha's presence and began suggesting that in order for the Buddha to become more popular and make the most of the resources available to other teachers, contemporaries of the Buddha, that he too has to use his own means of gaining more students and followers. In this case, by means, I am referring to miracle working abilities. And we saw how the Buddha was outlining that, in essence, there are three parts or three kinds of major umbrella, if you want to call it, parts of what people understand to be miracles, or teachers would describe as what constitutes miracles. One is physical, psychic feats, like supernatural type of events that involve physical world, doing things that what modern day Hollywood movies, kids movies talk about or describe as in superheroes type of thing, flying, this, that, walking on water. And then the second one was the Buddha delineating the second type of miracle involves seeing the hearts and minds of others. Telepathy, seeing what another is thinking, pondering, scheming, even though their words might be saying something else. But both of these, the Buddha also underlined as being disgusting, of a lower quality, to the point where he is unhappy when he sees that being performed. And in contrast, he talked about the third miracle. He mentioned it, rather. These were mentions because we just jumped into the Sila portion as to what the Buddha wants to first bring about in people, especially as listeners, rather than impress them with some psychic abilities, things of that nature. And the third miracle he mentioned was the miracle of instruction. And the Buddha mentioned how the first two, the former two, are in fact for lowborns, they're even dangerous because they don't bring about transformation in the person. Because Kevaḍḍha was simply saying, oh, it's going to just generate more faith. Well, what kind of a faith is that when it's all stemming from getting the person excited enough to think, oh wow, this person is better than the others because they could do this while the others cannot do this. So it's almost very similar to being a circus audience, because the teacher would then just be entertaining, and that's dangerous. Because the Buddha said how he presented examples to Kevaḍḍha that if somebody came to you and did these things, and would there be a possibility that you would turn around and say, well, this might be just a sleight of hand or some trick or some mantra that you're using to do this? Because there have been cases where people have. And Kevaḍḍha said, yes, one would argue so, yes. So where did that miracle go then in its significance? Down to the dumpster, that's where. So that's where we were, but we, the Buddha took us to what he wanted to highlight, which is the miracle of instruction. The miracle of instruction isn't just that, teaching someone. we have to look at it in the context of what miracles as such require. Most of the time when we talk about miracles, well, they require evidence, don't they? We need to prove that this miracle is happening, has happened, has happened. In the Catholic Church, for example, when there are people who witness something unusual, that might take years for the Catholic Church to designate a committee that goes, speaks to the actual people on the ground who have witnessed it. And after some years and a lot of deliberations and processes and all different things that they presumably have, then they might say, okay, there's plenty of evidence that this was a miracle. And they sign off on it. It requires evidence. Similarly, what Kevaḍḍha was also saying, that it might also be a trick. That's why. You have many magicians in the world that use these different techniques, that from Houdini to modern day so-called magician types that want to shock the audience. But essentially what the audience or people who, there was a guy named Randy, he used to go ahead and debunk all these so-called magician types or miracle workers by trying to replicate what they did or demanding that they show the evidence to such a thing. If they healed someone, a sick or a person who was crippled, and they got up, okay, they need to go and check whether this person was a cripple to begin with. So miracles require evidence to prove, to show to others. That's why these two, the psychic feats and reading the hearts and minds of others, can be dangerous, because you might find, some tools like NLP, neuro-linguistic programming strategies, whereby you could pretty much be able to tell what the next thing might be coming out of this person's mouth. If you've seen them enough times, if you've seen how they behave, or you look for cues in their behavior. So it can be figured out. That's why, to show that you are of a different level, you have to show proof. But wisdom doesn't require such evidence to show to someone. The miracle of instruction doesn't require you to prove to others its impact, its effect, its transformation, its self-transformation qualities upon you. That's because they are self-evident. This is where a lot of people mistake. They think there was a clip was sent of an interview that a famous actor was declaring his faith in the resurrection of Jesus. And he was going about explaining to the interviewer how important this is, and how without resurrection, there's no Christianity, which is a true statement. The part where if you remove resurrection, there's no Christianity. Unfortunately, that's what many people have equated it as. And then at the end of his statement about resurrection, he says, nobody else could do it. The Buddha did not do it, he says. This was the Hollywood actor Mel Gibson, the one who also did the Passion, I think, about Jesus, the life. So, and that makes you take a step back to look at what people understand and how much value they put in these miracles as the very cornerstone of their faith, their trust on this outside thing, the event that took place that could possibly be proven not true, or maybe it was, but not when you look at it from a Buddhist perspective, whether it was or wasn't is not important. even though Buddhism explains, we'll see that in this. I don't know if today would be the day for us to explore that portion of the sutta, which is the main highlight of the sutta, which I'm trying to build up towards it by having us explore the different aspects and the pedestals that allow the sutta to really shine. And that has to do with the story that the Buddha tells to Kevaḍḍha, which comes at the end of the sutta. And that story involves a bhikkhu, a monk, who goes from one deva realm to the next because he had the ability to do these things, to travel to different realms, including all the way to Brahma realms. His question, or his quest rather, was to find out where do the four primaries or four elements, fire, water, obviously earth, water, fire, and air, end. Where does the basically existence find its end? That's basically his quest. So he's going from realm to realm all the way up to the highest of Brahma realms. So that is where the finale of the story of the sutta will unfold. But every single part that we've been covering so far of the sutta is very pertinent to that, to demonstrate to us that the whole thing, for example, the resurrection I mentioned, is a quest in us. Similarly with the miracles, the seeking of miracles. Last week, I mentioned how when you look at the essence of the miracle, why does a person need to experience, or what is the whole infatuation, the desire to want to see and experience miracles, some form or another? Because a miracle by itself is inviting attention to oneself, saying, I am special, this is special, this is a special event, and hey, you over there, come and look at me because this is special. We saw from Venerable Bhumija Bharadvaja, Pindula Bharadvaja, I'm sorry. Last week I mentioned his story, for which reason we also have rules in the Vinaya, excuse me, as monks, not to, if and when a person does in fact have the ability, a supernatural ability, we do not show it, demonstrate it. We do not use it to display and bring attention to us. That's what makes it disgusting, by the way. I also mentioned how the Buddha was not against having the abilities to do miracles. Many, many, many hundreds, if not thousands of his bhikkhus had all these abilities. But he was against the going about displaying them to bring attention to oneself by using them, because that also is indicating a very lack in self-esteem, by the way. If you have it, okay, what's the big deal? Why do you need to go ahead and show it to others? Okay, well, when we look at even because I mentioned something about the resurrection, or not to put down the faith in Christianity, of course, that's not my objective here, but the whole point of why do we seek a miracle? Why do we look for another better beginning in another life? Because of our fear. That is the symptom that all living beings possess in their heart of hearts, in their deepest crevasses of their subconscious. That's what lies there, always animating our behavior, our thinking, in fact, our belief systems. So we will see especially how the Buddha was the only one who canceled it out, this leaving here, this body, so that we can have a new one over there. Because he said, if there's a birth in any realm, if there's a beginning, if there's a becoming into any new form, such as being in a paradise, or once this body is, decayed and dead, then you'll go and sit next to or merge with some higher source or God. And that's where you'll be for the rest of, eternity, and it never ends type of a thing. This is very infantile. The Buddha was the only one who completely eliminated this moving about. Why? Because he demonstrated that if there is a beginning, a birth, whether it's here, being into a little baby, or into a heavenly realm somewhere, it's a birth, it's a beginning. And you cannot have a beginning without an end, the Buddha says. You cannot have a decay and then a death, and then a rebirth somewhere, and then it's just going to be a rebirth, the becoming, and that's the end of that. And it's going to stay like that forever and ever and ever. Because no, if there's a beginning, if there's a becoming, if there's a new form in any realm, in any shape that you're desiring to be reborn into, that by its very fact of becoming, bhava, it will bring with it absolutely 100% of the time, because it's born, it's become, it will bring with it decay, aging, and death. And that's what we will see at the climax of this sutta, where the Buddha discusses this it's also a comical sutta because of this reason. It's an unusual sutta because it has an element of comedy in it, where the Buddha talks about the interaction between that monk that the Buddha is going to be describing to Kevaḍḍha, the one who goes from realm to realm, looking for an answer, thinking that the gods would have an answer as to where the four primaries, four elements end. And then there's this interaction between that monk and the Brahma God, to whom he has reached. And that was the final person to be going to, and still being disappointed. So that interaction is quite comical, which I don't want to give it away at this point. So you cannot have a becoming or a birth without death. Every other religion, every other religious path always is talking about the other. Yeah, once this ends, we're going to go over there, and it's going to be green pastures and heavenly rainbows and all that, delights, celestial enjoyments, and this and that, and time will stop, and there's no decay and no death from there. There's no such thing. Why? Because if you were born into such a realm, by the very fact that you were born, you will have to undergo decay, aging, and death, period. So the Buddha pulled the rug from even that, because the person I mentioned about fear of death. Why? Because we're afraid of letting go of a self, the idea, the conceit of a self. Essentially, what the person is doing is coming up with these theories and belief systems simply to perpetuate their sense of self into another realm. You see how sneaky it is? This fear of death. We've come up with entire philosophies, religious systems to perpetuate the sense of self, the conceit, I am, to perpetuate it in this form or that, to merge with this God or to sit next to the God, whatever it is that you're coming up with. We don't have that in the teachings of the Buddha. That's why he said we have to eliminate birth. It's unprecedented. There's no such thing. That's why not many people understood nor understand the Buddha and his message. That's why the Dhamma all the time, always will go into lower and lower and lower capacity minded people misinterpreting, to put it, to squeeze it into their smaller ways of interpreting, which is based on their sense of self being perpetuated because of their fear of death. That's why they come up with Atman and God who lives forever and ever, and the Buddha is even there. So it's not just, you see, in other religions, but also the Buddhist religious system, if you want to call it that, denomination that unfolded over time after the Buddha's demise, they also, so it's not just other religions that I'm highlighting that are on the false or wrong path, but also Buddhists who misinterpreted the Buddha's message. Because Nibbana, which is the extinction of existence, was looked down upon. So how do they make it more appetizing for the common person so that the common person wants to perpetuate the sense of self? That's why religions who are of a lower mentality type geared towards such people, because they don't want to break this conceit of I am. Many people will gravitate towards that, and that's what happened with Buddhism. That's what created the demise of Buddhism, because people didn't want to put the energy, didn't want to explain, were not even interested in the concept of extinction. To this day, people avoid using the word extinction for Nibbana, because that's what it is. The fire that's burning, when it dies out, where does it go? It's extinct. It's gone. Why? And why do we say it's extinct? Because there is no other place that the fire went to so that it can start or continue its journey of being a fire still some more. Because that would then perpetuate more decay, and again another death, another decay, another death, because of the birth of that. So without saying more than this, but I just wanted to give us feel for the sutta, because here in this section we will, because we left off at the Mahasila section. Remember, the Buddha is explaining to Kevaḍḍha the structure of what leads a person to the mastery or miracle of instruction. But also, to be instructed, they have to first have, to become able to perform the miracle of instruction, they also have to know what processes that they have to follow. It's a progressive path. It's a gradual path. It needs training. And that training starts with Sila. That's why in the Digha Nikaya, we've already gone over these sections in one form or another, these chunks in other suttas from the long discourses, such as the Pottapada, of course, the Brahmajala Sutta, and the Samanyapala Sutta, of course, with King Ajatasattu asking about the benefits or fruits of the holy life of recluseship. So I'm going to somewhat skim through this section because, again, they're big chunks, so that we can also make sure we can get into the main crux of the sutta sooner than in several weeks. So my hope is the latest would be next week that we'll unfold that section. But these are still important sections, and because the Buddha is addressing the different levels of training in Sila that has to come before we get into expecting changes to happen in the mind, the cultivation of the mind, which comes next, by the way. So Sila has to be there for the mind to really go deep, to be developed. Now, this doesn't mean that we only do Sila first for X amount of years or months, and then do the mental cultivation. No, that is wrong. Sila, Samadhi, Panya, virtuous behavior, development in that, mind cultivation and insights, wisdom, they happen together, but without Sila, nothing happens. Nothing happens. That's why all those who talk about mindfulness practice without Sila, which is basically what mindfulness came to be known as and so-called practiced as in the West and the world today, mindfulness this and that, they don't have Sila. They don't have Sila. Any religious so-called spiritually minded or trying to get you in contact with the deeper self, all that jazz, anything that is of value becomes that if there is sila, the development of morality, to develop iri and ottappa in oneself, that wise inner sense of shame and wise inner sense of moral fear. Those have to be there. You cannot evolve without iri and ottappa. It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible, categorically impossible for you to suddenly drop into, samadhi, or become an arahant. It's impossible. Why do I say this or stress this? Is because other traditions showed up in Buddhism that didn't mention sila. And all of a sudden you had these arahant types. My teacher is awakened. And then look at the presence of sila. Is it there? It's not. There's questionable things happening. So they work hand in hand. So without further ado, let's jump in. The longer section on virtue. Again, I'm going to skim as much as I can. So here's 3.1. Now, Kevaḍḍha, while other recluses and Brahmins who live through the generosity of the faithful who trust in them, obtain their livelihood through wrong means, such as by making predictions, divination, fortune-telling, psychic readings, casting spells, etc., etc., interpreting dreams, using different strategies to make a living, such as doing exorcism, pushing out demons and things from residences or even from people. All this the Buddha describes as livelihood and useless and wrong livelihood, and that is absolutely refused, shunned by the actual true bhikkhu, the Buddha says. This is also an aspect of his growth and development. Next, he says, anyone who has been involved with helping the selection of garments, staffs, swords, and other weapons from their supporters to gain access to the supporters' funds and to be liked by the supporters, helping them, for example, to make the best choices in the women with whom they were going to be married and the times, etc. All that is absolutely shunned by the bhikkhu. Similarly, with trying to predict who the next rulers or the kings will be, the next election, who's going to win, all that. Or the next one is about constellations and the star systems and their influence on the mind and the body and the life. Dabbling with astrology, things like that. So the bhikkhu is not interested. Similarly, with predicting weather patterns, sitting down and discussing all these causes and conditions whereby you impress others by your skill set at reading or explaining to people as to why they are now paralyzed. Or this person is like this because they were there in that lifetime and that life they've engaged in this or that desirable or undesirable action, which produced this desirable or undesirable effect. So you dabble with that instead of doing the work that you're supposed to be doing. So that's another way that you would have a wrong livelihood, meaning you break sila. So the same thing with conducting rituals and being obsessed with them, involved with arranging. That's the highlight of your temple. That's the highlight of your religious life. The Buddha says that's absolutely wrong. This is when it becomes very much like a cult. It becomes simply a rites and rituals endeavor, which unfortunately that's the case for most places. And this is, I'm referencing or referring to the Buddhist situation at this point in time in the world, sadly. Now, because of possessing this aggregate of virtue, the Buddha says, because this bhikkhu turned his back towards all those things, all that lifestyle that the Buddha was highlighting, then he says, then no danger could befall him, simply because he has protected himself from all sides with his restraint through intentionally living a virtuous life. Intentionally living a virtuous life. So even the sila, by the way, you probably heard me say this many times, has to have its justifying purpose. If you're doing, what I mean by that is this: if you're simply practicing sila for sila's sake and that's it, you're thinking of sila as the thing, the summum bonum, the thing, the highlight of your spiritual life, then you are in the same camp as the ones we went over. Meaning you are absolutely wrong. Because sila on its own, just like I was saying, samadhi or mental cultivation does not have a leg to stand on if it doesn't base itself on sila. Similarly, if sila has become your thing, the all in all, why you practice, while thinking that that's going to take you to Nibbana, the Buddha has a few things to say to you about that as well, because that's also stupid to think that you can just by practicing sila. Because here's the thing that many people do not appreciate well enough. Vijja and charana, these are two of the epithets of the Buddha, right? Vijja, charana, sampannus. When we say that, the qualities of the Buddha, what do we mean by that? The insight and the conduct, wisdom and conduct. Now, when there is no Buddha, we're not living in a Buddha's dispensation period. When the sasana is died and gone, disappeared, we're living in essentially a dark age where there's no Dhamma whatsoever in the human realm. Then a person can still have good conduct. You have other religions that will show up, that would be there. You know, don't do this, don't do that, do this. And you already have many examples in the world. Earlier, I was mentioning a few where they cater to the basic structure of creating a decent human being, which is a good thing. But to be able to have or gain wisdom, that's the vijja, that's the ability to have insight, the vipassana practice that can allow a person to cut the contact between birth, from birth, death to another birth, death cycle. That requires wisdom. That requires insight. That requires the Dhamma of a Tathagata still being around. That, in the absence of the dispensation of the sasana, will not occur. Charana will. The conduct, having a good, morally sound conduct, you will see, you will have. There have been periods of time where there's no Dhamma, but people, ever so often, some teachers would show up and they would say, no, we have to be more ethical, more this and that, and that's a good thing. But it will not take you any further than a good human or heavenly birth, and that's it. But then you come back after that death to go through the whole thing again. Why? Because the person has not penetrated. They've never experienced freedom from suffering. And that's what the Dhamma does. That's another very unique quality of the Dhamma. So sila can do that, can give you that good birth, good rebirth rather, but on its own. But when that is augmented, supported by samadhi and panya, now we're talking. Now we're definitely, unmistakably referring to the dispensation of a Tathagata, what we understand as Buddhism. So bear that in mind. Now, because of possessing this aggregate of virtue, being thus endowed with this virtuous behavior of the noble ones, he lives happily, experiencing within him the unmistakable sense of blameless joy. Thus, Kevaḍḍha, such a bhikkhu is declared to be well developed and matured in his virtue, for living with responsibility as per the wholesome principles of the Dhamma itself. Now the Buddha links this up, all these different three categories of sila, to the next linkage, which I mentioned to you as sila, samadhi. So this is the second. Mental cultivation, bhavana samadhi. Restraint of the sense doors, samvara. And how, Kevaḍḍha, does such a bhikkhu grow and become fully developed through his mental cultivation, his sense restraint? Here, Kevaḍḍha, on seeing a form with the eye, such a bhikkhu does not allow himself to be taken by or absorbed into its features and details. For he knows quite well that if he were to abide with an otherwise uncontrolled eye faculty, unwholesome states would start to leak in. Unwholesome, we mean, because many times, what does the word wholesome mean or unwholesome mean? Sometimes people don't have a firm grasp of it, understanding of it. Unwholesome means anything that is the opposite of being favorable, something that is unbeneficial, and in fact harmful to you, your practice. That's what we mean by unwholesome. And wholesome is favorably good, something that is beneficial, constructive, positive, aiding you in your process of growth, whereby he might very well fall victim to longing, covetousness, and dejection that would dominate his thoughts. Why? Because he was sucked into the story, into the features of the visible object. Thus, he guards and practices restraint of the eye faculty. These are not words. These are about you and your experiences with your eyes and what it sees throughout the day and night. If you want to make the Dhamma part of your life, bring the Dhamma into your life, into your interactions with your six senses and their objects. The Buddha did not talk about someone else. He talked about you, us. How often do you fall victim to just getting sucked into the signs, features, qualities, the uniqueness of what it is you're witnessing? Don't do that. That's what the Buddha is saying. Stop it right when it's occurring. Can you get to be so fast to detect the mechanism in action right at the beginning, post you having observed it? The Buddha is not saying become a piece of, a rug, not sensing, not having like a wall. No, the Buddha is saying be aware. The problem lies in the fact that post that contact, when it happens, already we are invested deeply in it. We put a story, we make a story out of it. We make it relevant to me and how I'm feeling. And that's the big one. Feeling comes in. Feeling makes everything dirty. In that sense, dirty. Why? Because it invests us in that thing which is actually neutral. That's it. And when we live like this, already we are cutting ourselves loose from aging, decay, and death. Why? Because we are getting rid of the birth part to begin with. Why? Because we're not looking forward to looking a little bit more, which is another birth. Another becoming. Oh, I wish I could see that again. You already set yourself up for failure because already you created the seeds. You put the seeds for another birth. But when you see it for what it is, and that's it, you don't add stories to it, that's it. What birth are we talking about? It ended. It's stillborn. It's gone. And you can experience that freedom now. That's why Nibbana happens now, not in another realm. Because that would be, again, another becoming for you, that you're setting up yourself for another failure by thinking like that, by pushing Nibbana over there. No, Nibbana is over here. Interactions with the six senses. Pay attention to that. Similarly, on hearing a sound with the ear, the bhikkhu does not allow himself to be taken by or absorbed into its features and details. So I'm going to go over just skip that section that repeats. Similarly, with an odor, smelling an odor with the nose, he does not allow himself to be taken by or absorbed into its features and details. Similarly, with the tasting of a flavor with the tongue, he does not allow himself to be taken, absorbed, sucked into its features and details. On touching a tactile object with the body, again, he does not allow himself to be pulled into its features and details. And on knowing a thought with the mind, the bhikkhu does not allow himself to be taken by or absorbed into its features and details. For he knows quite well that if he were to abide with an otherwise uncontrolled mind faculty, unwholesome states would start to leak in, whereby but by the way, that's also what an asava is. That's how we perpetuate the asavas, the influxes, the leakages, I call them, the contaminants of the heart. Well, what's contaminating about them? The interaction between what I'm seeing and what is there underneath, the tendencies that I have, the old tendencies that I've gathered over countless lifetimes. That's the asava. But the six senses are watering those asavas, creating more, perpetuating them more and more. That's why they're called leaking, contaminating influxes, the asavas, which we have to eliminate. That's what the Arahant has eliminated, those three asavas. Kamasava, the desire for sensuality, leakage, the becoming, the wanting to become a new birth, a new other, leakage, and the ignorance leakage, not being aware that this is going on. That's the avijjasava. So kamasava, bhavasava, and avijjasava. Those are the primary asavas that the Arahant has completely eradicated. So coming back to the sutta, he guards and practices restraint of the mind faculty. By possessing complete restraint over his mental faculty, such a bhikkhu is not perturbed when touched by a displeasing negative experience. Therefore, being thus endowed with this level of restraint over his sense doors, he lives happily, experiencing within him the unmistakable sense of blameless joy. And you don't have to prove it to anybody. You don't need evidence from outside where people come and say, yes, we agree, that was blameless joy. Who cares? You're experiencing it for yourself. You know it directly. Next section is maintaining mindfulness, sati, and full awareness, sampajanya. Whether approaching or going away, in looking forward, backward, and about, he remains mindful, clearly comprehending the experience of it with full awareness. Also, when bending and stretching his limbs, or in wearing his outer robes or taking the bowl with him, he remains mindful, clearly comprehending the experience of it with full awareness. Do you see the humanity? Do you see the normalcy? Seeming commonality, everyday nature of it, common, ordinariness of it. When you're walking forward, coming back, going somewhere, looking around you, you're functioning with sati and sampajanya. Sampajanya is full, clear awareness. Sati is mindfulness. So you're living with presence, with clarity. You are owning your behavior. You are owning your life. You don't answer to anyone for your behavior, in a sense, because you answer to yourself, because you're living authentically at this level. When eating his meal, drinking and tasting, he remains mindful, moving and behaving with full awareness, clearly comprehending the whole experience. Now, you're not sitting to analyze what's happening. You're simply there, which is a big stretch for many people. It's something that we don't know how to stay simple. This is another way of saying, another definition of simplicity, because you're getting your head out of the way. You're allowing life to happen with your presence, which is sati and sampajanya joined together. That's how an arahant lives. That's how a Buddha lives. Similarly, when urinating and defecating, he remains mindful, moving and behaving with full awareness, clearly comprehending the entire experience, whether he is walking, standing, sitting, or lying down to rest, or while waking up, speaking, or while being silent. You're still aware. This Kevaḍḍha is how such a bhikkhu lives by maintaining mindfulness and full awareness. And how Kevaḍḍha does such a bhikkhu live with contentment wherever and whatever situation he may find himself in. Kevaḍḍha, wherever he may be, living fully contented and satisfied with the robes for his body and the morsels of food he obtains for his stomach, the bhikkhu goes with all that he has. Those are your luggages. Those are your whole inventory. That's it. Thus, much like a bird that flies freely with only the feathers on its back, in the same way, contented and satisfied with the robes for the body and morsels of food for the stomach, wherever he goes, the bhikkhu goes with all his things. You know, bhikkhus, we don't have any pockets, which is such a wonderful gift the Buddha has left us with, I think. When I used to do a lot of traveling from place to place around the world, I would, going through airports, people would stop me because, the way we have the robes, and especially the lower robe, there's like a bundle of the fabric that's rolled up and things, so to keep it steady with the belt and all that. And they would think, oh, I'm hiding something, because first of all, they've probably never seen a bhikkhu. So they don't know what to do. So they pass this electrical or the sensor, and they're like, what do you have in there? I was like, check. So I would just allow them to see whatever they want to see. It's, to find within those folds of fabric. And I would say, by the way, what do you have in your pockets? They would say, we don't have pockets. I would just get a kick out of that every time. Such a perfect mechanism the Buddha had for us. In this manner, Kevaḍḍha, such a bhikkhu lives with contentment wherever he goes and whatever situation he may find himself in. By possessing these virtues as well of the noble ones, the bhikkhu experiences the internal happiness that is blameless. Now we get to the nivarana, which are the hurdles, the obstacles, the hindrances, working with them. Now, being endowed with this virtuous behavior of the noble ones through complete restraint over his mental faculties, along with mindfulness and clear comprehension with full awareness that are distinctive of the noble ones, he looks for and then abides in a secluded dwelling, a forest, the root of a tree, a mountain grotto, a cemetery, a jungle, an open space, or a heap of straw. Basically, wherever he can find a place secluded enough for him to sit down, to just practice. Then, having found himself a quiet area to practice in the forest or by the visible roots of trees or in an empty room, by folding his legs in a comfortable position and keeping the body straight, he establishes mindfulness in front of him. The term, in fact, here is, now whenever I come across the term in Pali, it's actually parimukha. Parimukha means around the mouth, literally. So establishing mindfulness around or in front of him, that's what we used to use a lot, but I'm now translating it more in terms of being aware of the breath coming in. That's why it's even though I have been a very big proponent of metta practice, I still am. And the book that I wrote was about that primarily rather than breath. However, when we sit down to practice, it's not often the case where we have metta in us immediately, okay? But you do have the breath. So we use that. We use the breath. As you're allowing the breath to come in, you feel temperature fluctuations around the nostrils, upper lip, around the face, parimukha. the Buddha's term for it. And then you might go ahead, the awareness comes in rather quickly depending on your practice level. And then you can just slide into your object of meditation, okay? That was given to you by the teacher. So, thus the bhikkhu trains and lives by actively dropping passion, lust, and greed from his heart, as he purifies it from the stains of coveting. He trains and lives by actively dropping anger from his heart, anger, hatred, ill will, as he purifies it from the stains of hatred. He trains and lives by actively dropping delusion from his heart, as he purifies it from the stains of delusion. He develops compassion towards all living beings as he purifies his heart from any hatred or ill will. With mindfulness and clearly comprehending his experience, he actively pushes through both drowsiness and procrastination, because we always delay. So oftentimes people translate as sloth and torpor. Most people don't know what torpor is. They can be joined into like sleepiness or sluggishness, but drowsiness covers that essentially. Procrastination is one that we do even with an actively engaged mind that wants to push away the opportunity to go and sit in that kuti, to put away the phone, the camera, the computer, whatever it is that you're engaged with, and says, how is this helping me now? How is this helping me to attain Nibbana now? And that is counteracting the procrastinating hindrance right there. And to stay yourself free from sluggishness or drowsiness, and the Buddha says here, he abides with the perception of light, cleansing his mind from drowsiness and procrastination. He thus calmly stabilizes the agitated mind, while carefully moving beyond both restlessness and worry, the next set of hindrances, as he abides with a heart that is now internally appeased and contented. Finally, by actively removing skeptical doubt, because it's not going to go by itself, it needs some help, actively removing them. He lives while putting an end to all doubts and perplexity he once had about the wholesome behaviors that should be developed and the unwholesome behaviors that should be abandoned, because you yourself now see the beneficial aspects of doing things that are wholesome, kusala, and the unbeneficial or harmful things that are akusala, harmful to you, even though you might have some special feelings towards those types of behaviors. You say, no, how is this helping me? If you have some friends that push you away or pull you away from the Dhamma, you stop interacting or going and hanging out with such friends or responding to their messages, because they have a life that is contrary to the Dhamma. Even though you used to feel good about it, now you're struggling. That's dukkha. Is there Dhamma in this interaction? No, bye-bye, I'm out of here. That should be the attitude, without any sense of guilt, because later on you will have guilt, remorse. Remember, we talked about remorse a few weeks ago, how important it is not to have, and how devastatingly toxic it is to the practice. Now, the Buddha doesn't just give us those clues or the heading for how to deal with them, and that's that. No, he gives similes. He gives similes. He's an incredible teacher. Nobody in history has ever used similes the way he did, to the extent that he did, to drive the point home. So similes for the hurdles, obstacles, nivarana. Now, Kevaḍḍha, imagine there was a man who goes and takes out a loan, borrowing money with the intention to invest in his business. As a result, his business does become successful and he prospers and earns much more than he did before, whereby he pays off all his debts. With his financial status now stable and lucrative, he is able to have a wife and start a family. Then this man begins to reflect. So previously I was miserable and worried ceaselessly about my financial status. But then I went and took out a loan by borrowing money, which I invested into my business. Now, seeing that I have prospered and gained so much wealth from this venture, I have already repaid all my debts and gave back whatever money I borrowed from others, to the point that I can now finally get married. Now that I have enough funds to maintain a wife and have a family of my own. As a result of this, the man becomes quite happy and relieved, experiencing much joy. This is, the Buddha is not describing such a situation for that, just that situation. No, the joy that he's feeling, this man, in such a situation, such a setting, is indicative, is similar to the joy that you feel when you relinquish the hindrances. The reason why the Buddha is using is to help us work around the hindrances, because you are facing them constantly, so long as you're not an arahant. The hurdles, the nivarana. So we have to use every tool in the toolbox to address them, to face them. They're not going to go away by themselves. That's why the Buddha spent extra time and energy to give us those tools. Furthermore, Kevaḍḍha, let us suppose that this man becomes sick and has to face much physical pain, and he can no longer function as before due to his illness. Then, as time passes, he gets better and fully recovers from his ailments, whereby he regains all his physical energy and is able to use his healthy body yet again. Then this man begins reflecting. Previously, I felt terribly sick and had to face much physical pain where I could no longer function as I used to. But now I have fully recovered and I can enjoy eating my meals yet again, having regained all my strength. Now, as a result of this, the man becomes quite happy and relieved, experiencing much joy. Furthermore, Kevaḍḍha, let us suppose that this man was taken to prison, where he is kept bound up and in shackles. However, after some time he is released, whereby he regains his freedom yet again, feeling safe and no longer in fear or captivity. Then this man begins reflecting. Previously, I was taken to prison, where I was kept bound up and in shackles, but now I have regained my freedom and I feel safe again, no longer in fear of captivity. As a result of this, the man becomes quite happy and relieved, experiencing much joy. Furthermore, Kevaḍḍha, let us suppose that this man was taken as a slave, no longer a free man. Instead, he lives being seen as nothing more than another's property, completely subject to their will. But after some time, he is released from slavery, whereby he gains back his cherished freedom and is no longer a slave, nor living or being seen as someone else's property, no longer subject to another's will. Then this man begins reflecting. Previously, I was taken as a slave, where I no longer was a free man, but instead, I lived while being seen as nothing more than another's property, completely subject to their will. But now, I have gained back my freedom, and no longer am I a slave, nor am I being seen as someone else's property, no longer subject to others' will. As a result of this, the man becomes quite happy and relieved, experiencing much joy. Also, Kevaḍḍha, let us suppose that a merchant was traveling on a journey in a caravan, carrying with him large amounts of gold coins and various other valuable goods, while having to cross a wide and desolate stretch of wilderness for some extended period of time. And then, once having crossed through it, as he emerges out from that wide and desolate stretch of wilderness area, he is finally relieved and relaxed, whereby his worries leave him, seeing that he has returned back to civilization where he feels the comfort of safety without having lost his wealth or his valuable goods. That was a terrible thing that, business people on their caravans had to undergo, because there would always be, for the most part, robbers and, people who would just kill you in the desert and take what you had with no witnesses. So that's a fear that they all had to face. Then this merchant begins reflecting. Earlier, while I was crossing that wide and desolate stretch of wilderness area with all my wealth and various other valuable goods, I was worried and in fear of danger. But now, having already crossed it, I have emerged from the wilderness. I'm finally relieved and relaxed because I no longer have any worries, seeing that I've returned back to civilization. Hence, I feel safe again, not having lost my wealth or my valuable goods. As a result of this, the man becomes quite happy and relieved, experiencing much joy. Now, in the same manner, Kevaḍḍha, so long as these 5 obstacles are still not abandoned and relinquished in him, that bhikkhu will continue to look upon them as being no less than a debt or a loan that he has to pay. A terrible sickness he must overcome, a prison sentence he has to struggle through, a slavery he must endure and break free from, and an arduously dangerous journey through a desolate stretch of wilderness that he must cross and push himself through. And when he does indeed let go and abandon these 5 obstacles or hindrances to his mental cultivation, then he regards them as successfully paying back a heavy loan, gaining of one's health, release from prison, attaining freedom from slavery, and finally, tasting the safety of security. When the mind is uplifted with joy, the body experiences happiness. With the tranquilizing of the body, there is delight everywhere. With the citta, or heart, feeling such comfort, and the mind thus composed and controlled, Dhamma arises in the mind. With the mind thus controlled, one sees and understands how things really are. Bhante Punnaji used to recite this to me every time I would sit with him at the end of our conversation. It was such a wonderful time, like having goosebumps now. He would say, he would close his eyes. Well, he wouldn't close his eyes that often, but I'm closing mine now. Iti manassa kayang pasambati, pasaddha kayo sukhang vediyati, sukhino chittang samadhiyati, samahite chitte dhamma pak bhavo, samahite chitte yatha bhutang pajanati. That's in the Pali, which I just read in English. Beautiful. Next, we get to the jhanas. Here, Kevaḍḍha, while living secluded and removed from sensual desires and unwholesome thoughts, the bhikkhu enters upon and remains in the first jhana, which is accompanied by thinking and pondering, along with joy and pleasure that arises from such seclusion. Further, Kevaḍṭha, the bhikkhu drenches and saturates his entire body with this joy and bliss that are aided by seclusion. Seclusion has to happen, secluding yourself from sensual desires, sensuality, seeking after sensual desire, not just physical, but looking forward for lovely sounds, this and that, textures, lovely things, sensuality. You have to seclude yourself, not just physically plus that. What's the point if you physically secluded yourself and you're still lost in your sensual desires in your seclusion? Because that's what happens, especially when you're on retreat. But instead, one of the things that happens in the first jhana is that joy and bliss that come, that the Buddha says. So the bhikkhu keeps allowing them to pervade the physical body from top to bottom and everywhere, without leaving any spot that is untouched by this experience of joy and bliss. It is just like a skilled bathman or his apprentice who, by putting some soap powder in a bronze bowl and while sprinkling water on it, would mix it until it is a smooth ball of moist, oily foam pervading it throughout, without the ball of soap dripping or oozing out. In many countries, especially old world civilizations, you still have this in some places where you would have, in Arabic, it's called hammam, meaning bath. And you would have a person who gets paid. He bathes you, basically, does the, the exfoliating and all that, and they will use a ball of soap in something that looks like a loofah or sponge. But when they're applying it, this tells you of how much the Buddha actually experienced this as a crown prince. So when they have mixed it right with enough soap, which was an expensive thing in those days, by the way, at the time of the Buddha, then they would put it on this sponge or yeah, like a loofah. You turn it upside down. If it's really done well, it doesn't drip. It's so well done. So when they are, I guess, rubbing the body with that, the bathman or his apprentice, it doesn't drop, it doesn't leak, it doesn't fall, it doesn't drip, basically. The image is quite remarkable. The Buddha is using something that is related with the body, because this experience, the first jhana, we're still very much in the body. But the joy, it feels like, because your whole body is covered up with soap, type of a thing. And there isn't a section that is missing, patches where there's no soap. So the Buddha's reference here is about the joy that is felt throughout, from the top of your head down to the bottom and everywhere in between. In the same manner, the Bhikkhu drenches and saturates his entire body with this joy and bliss that are aided by seclusion, allowing them to pervade the physical body everywhere without leaving any spot that is untouched by this experience of joy and bliss. This also, Kevaḍḍha, is what is meant by the miracle of instruction, because someone has to teach you. Someone has to guide you, and Lord Buddha is teaching us. Now, Kevaḍḍha, through the disappearance of both thinking and pondering, he enters upon, those are vitakka and vichara in Pali. He enters and remains in the second jhana, which has self-confidence and singleness of mind that take place in the absence of thinking and pondering. So you're no longer shadowboxing with your thoughts. You're not conceptually, you're not constructing any thoughts. You're not thinking. You're not even having a dialogue with yourself. Okay, now this happens, now that happens. Already, that's you dropped out. Maybe you're in the first jhana, or maybe you're completely out of any of the jhanas. So, but what he says is, with joy and pleasure that are the result of his deepening samadhi, his collectedness of mind. So samadhi, in order for it to be there, to be settling in you, the noise has to stop. The noise. You cannot talk yourself into jhanas, okay? You can definitely talk your way out of jhanas by talking. Here too, Kevaḍḍha, he drenches and saturates his entire body with this joy and bliss that are results of his collectedness of mind, samadhi, allowing them to pervade the physical body from top to bottom and everywhere, without leaving any spot that is untouched by his experience of joy and bliss. It is just like a deep lake that is fed by the natural spring underneath it, where despite there being no inflow of streams from the east, west, north, and south, nor receiving any sporadic showers of rain to replenish it, yet the lake is still kept cool as it continues to be fed by the natural spring flowing underneath. In the same manner, the Bhikkhu drenches and saturates his entire body with this joy and bliss that are the results of his collectedness of mind, allowing them to pervade the physical body everywhere, without leaving any spot that is untouched by this experience of joy and bliss. This also, Kevaḍḍha, is what is meant by the miracle of instruction. Another beautiful image. Imagine a plateau in the mountains somewhere, and you look from that plateau and you see almost like a valley, but it's full of water. It's a lake, or any lake, but there's no water coming in from any direction, even from the rain. There's no such thing. but yet when you touch it, when you go in it, it's cool. Already it has a refreshing feel upon the body. And the Buddha says it comes from underneath. So it is not being impelled. It is not because of you doing something that the water is coming in. That's what spring water does. It's coming from underneath the lake. That's why the lake is replenished and cool. This, we have to take that image into the second jhana. This is important. There's a trust there that's necessary, because in the isolation, in the quietude that happens with vitakka and vichara, stopping, thinking and pondering, there first has to be the trust. The process is undergoing. The process is taking shape on its own, just like the spring water underneath, feeding the lake. This is why a lot of people cannot enter beyond the first jhana, or struggle a lot until they develop enough in the department of trust to allow, because we have been trusting, or putting our faith in the chit chat that we have, in our concepts, in our thinking and planning. Next, Kevaḍḍha, with the detachment from and the fading away of joy itself, the bhikkhu remains in the comfort of equanimity while being mindful and fully aware, with pristine clarity, experiencing pleasure and happiness within the body. As he enters upon and remains in the third jhana, about which the noble ones declare, it is such a one indeed who is serenely mindful, abiding in happiness, with an ever-present sense of equanimity. Here too, Kevaḍḍha, the bhikkhu drenches and fills his entire body with soothing happiness, where joy has faded away. As he saturates, and now, by the way, when the statement is, when joy has faded away, please do not think that, oh, so joy is gone, now I'm in the opposite state of basically the absence of joy. So in the negative state type of a thing. No. Joy is too vibrant, it's too shaky, it's too agitating for the heart, for the mind. The practicing of meditation, as you go deeper and deeper into the jhanas, into samadhi, basically, requires us to become more and more sensitive to agitations. That's why I said earlier about even certain people and friends that we have to walk away from because they are agitating. And one of the worst things that agitates the heart, the mind, is remorse. That's why we're practicing also sila, to cancel out the possibility of remorse and regret or worry. So here, the joy and its agitation is being reduced, but it doesn't mean that it's not a pleasant experience. It doesn't mean that it is not a happy experience. That's why you want to stay in it longer. You want to come back to it again and again. As he saturates and pervades his physical body with it from top to bottom and everywhere, without leaving any spot that is untouched by this experience of soothing happiness, with joy having faded away. It is just like a pond where some blue, white, and red lotuses are born, grown and bloom while being immersed within the water, with their tops and roots remaining submerged, thriving in the cool, refreshing water, without rising above its surface as the cool water drenches, fills, saturates, and pervades the entire length of each of these lotuses, from their tips to their roots. In the same manner, the bhikkhu drenches and fills his entire body with soothing happiness where joy has faded away, as he saturates and pervades his physical body with it from top to bottom and everywhere, without leaving any spot that is untouched by this experience of soothing happiness, with joy having faded away. This also, Kevaḍḍha, is what is meant by the miracle of instruction. Afterwards, by giving up both pleasure and pain, and having already gone beyond joy and anguish, he remains in the continuous state of purifying mindfulness with an ever-present sense of equanimity as he enters upon and abides in the fourth jhana, while experiencing neither pleasure nor pain, having now gone beyond both of them. Here also Kevaḍḍha, the bhikkhu, sits while his entire body is being pervaded with a pure, bright mind, without having any part of his body not be touched by the pure, bright mind. It is just like someone sitting while being draped from head to toe with a soft white linen or fine fabric, without having any part of his body not be covered by that soft white linen or fabric. In the same manner, the bhikkhu sits while his entire body is being pervaded with a pure, bright mind, without having any part of his body not be touched by the pure, bright mind. This also, Kevaḍḍha, is what is meant by the miracle of instruction. What a lovely, lovely image. Covered up. Safety of another level. Safety of having the mind being everywhere. Next, we get to the higher knowledges, abhiññā, insight knowledge, vipassana jnana. Now, when vipassana is insight, by the way, often used, you probably know. Now, when the bhikkhu's mind becomes thus collected and stable, well concentrated, bright in its purity, stainless, malleable, and wieldy, absent of any imperfections, flawless, unshakable by having reached the state of imperturbability, he then directs it towards the attainment and experiencing of knowledge and vision. To this end, he comes to understand directly and viscerally. This body of mine is made up of material form, put together by the four primary elements that found their material origin thanks to a father and a mother, sustained by rice and porridge. And because it is, by nature, impermanent, this body of mine is and will always be susceptible to being scraped, scratched, broken, subject to pressure, heat and cold, to rubbing and touching, and ultimately to being destroyed and dispersed. Moreover, this is the consciousness that is supporting it, whereby the body still exists, right here and now, and to which it is tied and bound. Kevaḍḍha, imagine there was a beautiful beryl gem, as pure in its clarity as spring water, 8-faceted, well cut, unblemished, translucent, flawless, and possessing all the excellent qualities of a precious gem. Now suppose one were to pass through it a blue, yellow, red, white, or brown string, and a man with very good eyesight would take it in his hand and, after carefully examining, would comment by saying, "Ah, this happens to be a beautiful beryl gem that is as pure in its clarity as spring water. It has all its facets, well cut, unblemished, translucent, flawless, and possessing all the excellent qualities of a precious gem, which has a blue, yellow, red, white, or brown string running through it." Now, Kevaḍḍha, in just the same way, when the bhikkhu's mind becomes thus collected and stable, well concentrated, bright in its purity, stainless, malleable, and wieldy, absent of any imperfections, flawless, having reached the state of imperturbability, he then directs it towards the attainment of and experiencing of knowledge and vision. To this end, he comes to understand directly and viscerally. This body of mine is made of material form. So that section repeats itself that we just went over. This also, Kevaḍḍha, is what is meant by the miracle of instruction. Knowledge of creating a mind-made body, manomaya, manomayidhi. It's manomaya, but because it has two vowels together, manomayidhi jnana. Idhi means usually translated as higher power, understanding, psychic power, ability, etc. the knowledge of that, so jnana, the insight of that. Now, when the bhikkhu's mind becomes fully collected and stable, well concentrated, bright, in its purity, stainless, malleable, and wieldy, absent of any imperfections, flawless, unshakable by having reached a state of imperturbability, he then directs it towards creating a mind-made body. To this end, he creates another body for himself, fully complete in its form and all its various parts and constituents, entirely made by the mind, and not lacking in any of its faculties. Kevaḍḍha, imagine a man were to peel off a reed from its sheath, whereby, while holding the two, he would clearly know and discern that one is the reed and the other the sheath. So imagine a reed that you pull the skin off. You're holding now two instead of one. One is the skin, the sheath, or the Buddha is going to give more examples that might stay with you. And the other one is the inside of the reed. Or Kevaḍḍha, imagine someone pulling a sword from its scabbard. Now, he too would clearly distinguish the two as one being the scabbard, while the other being the sword itself. When you pull the sword from its sheath or scabbard, what it holds it, the blade, now you have the sword itself and the scabbard. Or Kevaḍḍha, imagine someone pulling away the worn-out slough or slough from the snake's body, who would see that there is in fact a clear difference between the snake itself and the slough, which happens to be its old skin. Now, in just the same manner, Kevaḍṭha, when the bhikkhu's mind becomes fully collected and stable, well concentrated, bright in its purity, etc., he is then able to direct it towards creating a mind-made body. So this bhikkhu practicing this ability, having the ability, manomayidhi jnana, it's one of the abhinyas, the higher abilities, is able to create a version, a copy of oneself, but it's purely mind-made. Purely mind-made, and that's why the Buddha gave the example. Now, the sheath or the scabbard is not the sword anymore, is it? The sword is here. That's just the scabbard. Similarly with the slough or the slough of the skin of the snake or the reed. Two different things. You're not making an exact copy of yourself. It's mind-made. To this end, he creates another body for himself, fully complete in its form and all its various parts and constituents, entirely made by the mind and not lacking in any of its faculties. This also, Kevaḍṭha, is what is meant by the miracle of instruction. Knowledge of various psychic powers, iddhividhi jnana. Plethora of psychic powers, iddhividha jnana. So this is now the Buddha. Remember, the Buddha is not against having psychic powers or developing them. It is in their display to bring attention to yourself, which ultimately is what most of the time people use. I don't think people know about the miracles that happen when the performer, or not the performer, but the one who's able to do them, is living in the middle of the desert, not taking selfies of himself, posting it on Instagram or some social media so other people could see. When you see that already, it screams at you that it's a fraud. But simply because it's happening in their privacy, let's say, in private, does not mean that the miracle isn't happening. But if and when they are happening, it doesn't mean, well, they have to be shown to anyone. That's the stumbling block for many people who want to have these abilities simply to show off, to demonstrate to others, see, I'm important. Come, worship me, come, venerate me, come have faith in me, which was basically what Kevad was after, right, in the beginning, so that the Buddha could get the people in Nalanda to come to him as a trick, like using them as a trick, miracle. The Buddha is saying no, and is instead giving him and us, fortunately, this wonderful dispensation, this instruction. Now, when the bhikkhu's mind becomes thus collected and stable, well concentrated, bright in its purity, stainless, malleable, and wieldy, absent of any imperfections, flawless, unshakable by having reached a state of imperturbability, he then directs it towards activating his psychic powers as he wields a plethora of psychic abilities, such as, while being one, he becomes many, and then reverts back to being one again. He moves without any obstructions through rocks and walls and other fortifications, as if walking through space. He dives into the earth and comes out of it as though it were water. He walks on water without disturbing it, walking on it as if on solid ground. He sits comfortably and flies through the air like birds of all sizes do, without any difficulty. He reaches and touches the moon and the sun despite their mighty size and magnitude. Thus, with the psychic powers he wields, he is able to carry his body even as far as the Brahma realms without any difficulty. Kevaḍḍha, imagine an experienced potter or his top apprentice who takes a lump of fine quality and malleable clay and then starts molding it into whatever kind of pottery or shape he would want. Or imagine someone who is talented at carving ivory pieces, or his number one apprentice who would take any kind of ivory and then begin shaping and carving it into whatever design he wants. Or imagine an experienced jeweler or his top apprentice who takes a piece of gold and then fashions it into any kind of shape or design he may desire to. Now, in just the same manner, Kevaḍḍha, when the bhikkhu's mind becomes fully collected and stable, well concentrated, etc., he then directs it towards activating his psychic powers as he wields a plethora of psychic abilities, such as the ones that we just were introduced. This also, Kevaḍḍha, is what is meant by the miracle of instruction. Knowledge of the divine ear, Dibba Sota Jnana. Knowledge, or just having the divine ear, the capacity to hear. Now, when the bhikkhu's mind becomes thus fully collected and stable, well concentrated, etc., he then directs it towards the divine ear element. To this end, while possessing the divine ear, far surpassing that of the human in its strength and purity, he starts hearing the sounds of both heavenly and human beings, whether far or near. Kevaḍḍha, imagine a man traveling on the main road while witnessing the world around himself, who begins to hear the sounds of various drums, whether big or small, such as dhols, tablas, conchas, udukkus, damarus, khols, nakkaras, or cymbals. Many of these are traditional, presuming drums, like tom-toms and things. He would then discern clearly and identify every one of these drums from the distinct sound each of them makes. Now, in just the same manner, Kevaḍḍha, when the bhikkhu's mind becomes fully collected and stable, etc., he then directs it towards the divine ear. To this end, while possessing the divine ear, far surpassing that of human in its strength and purity, he starts hearing the sounds of both heavenly and human beings, whether far or near. This also, Kevaḍḍha, is what is meant by the miracle of instruction. So the example of being able to distinguish the dhol or the big drum or the tambourine and things like that, you know which one's which, especially if it's an expert person, musician, etc. You would be able to distinguish between them. Now, sometimes people might wonder, is this about like actual sound, like the sound I'm making that you're hearing? Is this similar? No. It's done through the heart. It's done through the chitta. One knows it for a fact. It's unmistakable for them. They hear it. They all, oftentimes they have to just direct their attention, at least initially, but oftentimes they hear it if they developed it. But it's a good, I think, opportunity for us to remove ourselves from a state of mediocrity that is the world that we're living in, and how it's making us believe that what you see is what you have. That's it. we're not beyond this. No, these suttas are wonderful, because that's why I don't shy away from exploring them with you, because they're so potently relevant, especially now, to pull us out of that mediocrity. These abilities are real. These things are real. Simply because you don't see it around you does not mean they're not, or they've gone. They are just hearsay. They're just nonsensical mumbo jumbo of olden times. No, they are real. Number 5, knowledge of the hearts and minds of others. Chetoparianyai. This is the second one that the Buddha was saying, right, in the beginning, mentioning about the miracles. Now, when the bhikkhu's mind becomes thus collected and stable, well concentrated, bright in its purity, etc., he then directs it towards knowing the hearts and minds of other beings. To this end, he directly comes to know a heart that is full of lust as it truly is, clearly seeing it drenched in lust. The person doesn't have to say or do anything. They're sitting across from you, or thousands of miles away, or even on a screen. You'll be able to know. Or somebody mentions to you the name of someone that they know, and automatically it is clear to you who they really are. Similarly, he directly comes to know a heart that is full of hatred as it truly is, clearly seeing it drenched in hatred, even though they have a big, wide, lovely smile on their face. Now, go ahead and try to explain that to all those people who are mesmerized by that person's smile. They vow, they say, no, 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 you're wrong, because they are mesmerized by what they see. Meanwhile, you see something far deeper, totally different than what they're seeing. Similarly, he directly comes to know a heart that is full of delusion as it truly is, clearly seeing it drenched in delusion. Also, he directly comes to know a heart that is collapsing, or one that is sluggish, drowsy, and caving in, or driven to procrastination, as well as clearly seeing if the heart is distracted and pulled this way and that, being scattered and unstable in the presence of restlessness or worry. So these are parts of the hindrances. You will know when the person is being, losing hope, collapsing, lost in this or that, or sluggishness, drowsiness, even if they're not sleeping. But you're talking to them, they're not there, or they're worried. Also, he directly comes to know a heart that is in an exalted or lofty state as a result of meditative practice, even though they might look very calm, relaxed, quiet, with almost no expression, but you will be able to see what's really happening. And a heart that is still not yet developed to experience such sublime and lofty states. Also, he directly comes to know a heart that is in a mundane and surpassable state, clearly distinguishing it from a heart that is in fact unsurpassable, someone who's still on the verge of making a breakthrough, and someone who has made the breakthrough. Also, he directly comes to know a heart that is in a concentrated and stable state, clearly distinguishing it from a heart that is in fact unconcentrated and unstable. And he directly comes to know a heart that is indeed liberated and released, while clearly distinguishing it from a heart that is in fact unliberated and still unreleased. That is how the Buddha would know, or an Arahant would know with these abilities, because not every Arahant would have these abilities, by the way, as we see in the Susima Sutta, which one day we'll go over. But because he was under the impression that a person that becomes an Arahant automatically has all these special powers. And he is corrected by many Arahants when he goes and asks them. The Venerable Susima he would just be like looking with a flashlight, just looking for, oh, who's an Arahant? Who became an Arahant? So he would go immediately to them, to their kuti, and interrogating them. Oh, do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have this? And they would say no. Because that was his reason why he became a bhikkhu. And they would disappoint him by saying, no, we don't have that. Well, we know one thing: the defilements are destroyed. There's no asavas. So unless the person said it, you might look at the person who's like, okay, he's a regular person. But the Buddha would see and know the mind of such a person as being truly liberated without them saying anything. Now, okay, so imagine, Kevaḍḍha, a young man or a woman who places a lot of focus on being and looking attractive, who, while putting on ornaments and jewelry, carefully examines his or her reflection through a flawless mirror or a bowl of clear water. Now, in the presence of a blemish on the face, he or she would immediately notice it and see that there is, in fact, the undeniable fact of a blemish on the face. And when seeing that there are no blemishes, that person would again clearly discern that there is, in fact, no blemishes to be found at all. Now, in just the same manner, Kevaḍḍha, the Bhikkhu directs his mind that is now, as he said, fully collected and stable and pure, towards knowing the hearts and minds of other beings. And here he repeats that. So the mind will be able to see what is not advertised, what is not expressed. If you recall, a few months ago, I think it was, a sutta we covered where Venerable Bhante Candana was visited by one of his former students who was now a Brahma god or similar to it. And he warned him of Devadatta having decided on breaking the Sangha. When he went, Venerable Moggallana, and reported the matter to the Lord Buddha, the Buddha asked what? He said, Moggallana, did you check his mind? Guess what? Venerable Moggallana had the power, of course, being supreme, only second to the Buddha in these abilities, all of these that we're going over. He said, yes, Bhante, I checked his mind and he was telling the truth. No lie detector test can beat such a mind, because you can beat a lie detector test, I think some have said. But he saw it through and through, the heart and mind of that Deva who had come warning him. And he also had trust in that being, because he was formerly a bhikkhu as well, a good practicing one. And Lord Buddha also checked Venerable Moggallana's heart. He would do it all the time. You don't see it in the suttas that often, but the Buddha would see it clearly. All he had to do is direct the mind to it, or the devas would inform him, whisper to Lord Buddha, this is what's happening, Bhante. And then the Buddha would check with his mind. He encourages it in many suttas in the Anguttara Nikaya and elsewhere for practitioners to develop that ability. Sixth, knowledge of the recollection of past lives. Pubbhe nivasa bussati jnana. Now, when the bhikkhu's mind becomes thus collected and stable, well concentrated, bright in its purity, stainless, malleable, and wieldy, absent of any imperfections, flawless, unshakable, etc., he then directs it towards recollecting and knowing the past lives and existences of himself and other beings. Thus, he is able to remember his many past lives in all their details and features. That is, 1 birth, 2 births, 3, 4, 5 births, 10 births, 20, 30, 40, 50 births, 100 births, 1,000 births, 100,000 births, many eons of world expansions, many eons of world contractions. Expansion, the cosmos, Big Bang, and then it contracts, the big crunch they call it. Many eons of world expansions and contractions, recalling them all in this manner. There I was so named, of such a family, with such an appearance. Such was my food and sustenance. Such were my experiences of pleasure and pain. Such was my lifespan, and after passing away from there, I was reborn elsewhere. And there too I was so named, of such a family, with such an appearance. Such was my food and sustenance. Such were my experiences of pleasure and pain, and such was my lifespan. And passing away from there, I was reborn here. In this manner, Kevaḍḍha, the Bhikkhu recalls his numerous previous lives and existences, in addition to their specific details and features. You're not making up stuff. You're seeing details. Imagine there was someone who decides to travel from his own village and goes to another one, Kevaḍḍha. And later, after departing from that village too, he travels to yet another village. And once he finishes his touring, he finally returns back to his native village. In the same way, the man would start reflecting. Earlier, I was in my own village, but then I left as I traveled to the other village. While I was over there, I was standing there. Then I sat like that in such and such a place, talked and conversed with others in this way, while keeping quiet elsewhere in that way. Later, when I left that village, I went to the other one, where I sat on such a seat, stood in such a place, while communicated with those around me in this or that manner, and remained silent on such occasions. It was only after that when I decided to return back to my own and native village. Now, in just the same manner, Kevaḍḍha, when the bhikkhu's mind becomes thus fully collected, he then directs it towards recollecting and knowing the past lives and experiences of himself and other beings. So imagine after a busy day of you moving about town, and somebody came and asks you, how was your day? What did you do? And you recall. You're like, yeah, I did this, I did that. It becomes, as a matter of fact, it's a fact. You know it happened. So you speak with that much authority, having experienced it, just like that man going from village to village. But in this case, we're talking about your past births, your lives and experiences. When the person has this ability, they will be able to see those details as if they're there. And then they would jump from life to life with, oh yeah, but here, but there, but this, without having a special attachment to any or either one of them. Now, this is a special and I would say a good ability to have if you have very strong attachments to people and places and experiences from this life. I've said it more than a few times to individuals who came asking how to overcome grief of loss, whether it's a child, family members, parents. Their expression changes the moment especially if they have openness to hearing the Dhamma, and especially in this case, the reality of past lives. All of a sudden, their expressions change. When I bring in, if they're attached here with their mother and father here, or their loss, or how special they are to them, and I would just compare, well, how about your other parents? Let's just go with the one that was last life, the past last life from which you came here. You had parents there too. How about the ones before that? Did you have any parents? Of course, if you were born, you had to have parents somehow. All of a sudden, the infatuation, the stronghold of their emotionality to these people here in this life vanishes, disperses. At least it shakes that position of theirs. Now imagine if you're able to actually see this for yourself. That's what I'm driving at. When a person is able to see even one or two of such past lives of oneself, it concretizes it. It's no longer seen as an ability, but it's augmenting your understanding and therefore your insight about anicca, dukkha, and anatta. You're seeing there's no substantiality. Who are we talking about? What mom and dad? What's so special? Because over there was somebody else that I was incredibly in love with. But I said bye to, and now I'm in love with this person. Well, how fickle is this thing called love then? You know, parents, this, that, same thing. But you're seeing it for yourself. You don't look for evidence. You know it. 7, knowledge of the passing away and reappearance of beings. Dibba chakku jnana. This is another function of Dibba chakku. And the one earlier I was also saying the divine eye. So that's the other aspect. Now, when the bhikkhu's mind becomes thus fully collected and stable, well concentrated, bright in its purity, etc., he then directs it towards knowing and the dying and rebirth of beings into the various realms. To this end, with the divine eye, which is pure and far superior to those of humans and other beings, he applies the psychic power of knowing the destinations of beings as they die and reappear into the different realms of existence. Thus, he sees clearly all types of beings dying at the end of life, whether being reborn into exalted or miserable states, into beautiful or ugly forms, fortunate or unfortunate, witnessing this by directly seeing, and therefore understanding clearly how beings pass on to different states according to their actions, their kamma, whereby he knows how these beings who behaved badly through their bodily actions, their speech, and their mental actions, being disrespectful towards the noble ones, while grasping onto their wrong views and on account of their wrong views in action, with the breakup of the body after death, they are now reborn in a state of misery, utter deprivation, in a bad destination, in evil states, and in the hells. But these worthy beings who behaved virtuously through their bodily actions, their speech, and their mental actions, being respectful towards the noble ones, being right in their views, and on account of their right views in action, with the breakup of the body after death, they are now reborn into a state of happiness, in a good destination, even in the heavenly world. Therefore, with the divine eye, which is far superior to those of human beings and other animals, the bhikkhu sees clearly beings dying at the end of their life, and how they are reborn into either exalted or miserable states, beautiful or ugly, fortunate or unfortunate. No one's giving them birth in a sense, like bringing them into a world other than themselves. This is one of the things, the biggest dilemmas I grew up with having every time I would see people who were not deformed, or compared to others who were born deformed with body parts missing or blind. I was always questioning, how could there be a God who is making a person be born without legs or be born blind? What kind of a universe are we living in when someone is dictating this higher being? It didn't make sense. It was wrong. Something was off. So you can imagine my joy and delight when I came across the Dhamma, because it explains everything. Nobody, no God is responsible for you ending up being fortunate or unfortunate, ugly or beautiful, having all your body parts intact or missing one or more. Witnessing this by directly seeing and therefore understanding clearly how beings pass on to different states according to their actions. Kevaḍḍha, imagine that right where there is a major crossroad of 4 paths meeting, there was a mansion built in the central square. Then someone with excellent eyesight climbs up to the highest level of that mansion and begins looking at the people moving about in this and that direction, all in full view to his clear and unobstructed vision. In just the same manner, Kevaḍḍha, when the bhikkhu's mind becomes fully collected and stable, well concentrated, bright in its purity, etc., he then directs it towards knowing the dying and rebirth of beings into the various realms. What an image! You going up to a higher point, at a high point, and looking down in different directions. All you have to do is look in the direction of those people that you want to see, where they're coming from. You'll know they're coming from there, that direction. It's undeniable, it's unquestionable. They're coming from there to here. And these ones are going from here to there. It's such a powerful simile. It captures it. It's undeniable for the person who has the sight. They will see, oh, poor thing, they died so young. Okay, the fact is, yes, there's grief now for the family members of that younger person who died. But to have this sight also means you pull up and you look at the bigger picture. And then you see, oh, yes, he was or she was a poor thing now, but in the past, they did this. This is being able to also find validation, clear validation to the principles, unmistakability of kamma, the law of kamma, that is, with your own sight, your own abilities. So this also is crucial. So here, Lord Buddha is also saying this is with the divine eye, the person is able to therefore understand clearly how beings pass on to different states according to their actions. This Kevaḍḍha is also what is meant by the miracle of instruction. Remember, these at this point, you're not doing this as a circus performance. You're not doing this to get someone's attention. You're doing this to assist you in understanding the fuller spectrum of the Dhamma, your own experiences in it, your understanding of the Dhamma, and to help you progress into understanding the validity, getting the scientific proof, if you will, of anicca, dukkha, anatta, because now you're seeing the whole range of the cosmos, beings coming and going. No wonder that many arahants experience this right there before their awakening, which assists them to really breaking free. I say many arahants, although my understanding is that all arahants experience that, albeit free very quickly, depending on how the level of the one that I mentioned, the past lives, the one that I just mentioned, the destination and where they're coming from, beings from their birth to death, and especially the last one here is this one. This is the very important one that we'll go over, and perhaps we'll stop here after this. Yes, we'll finish this section and we'll stop. Knowledge of the destruction of the heart's contaminants. Earlier I mentioned the asava. So this is asava kaya jnana. Kaya means not kaya, kaya, double K with an H following. It is destruction, obliteration, kaya. Now, when the bhikkhu's mind becomes thus collected and stable, well concentrated, bright in its purities, stainless, malleable, and wieldy, absent of any imperfections, flawless, unshakable by having reached a state of imperturbability, he then directs it towards the knowledge of the destruction of the heart's contaminants. Thus, he comes to directly know and unmistakably see this is suffering. He comes to directly know and unmistakably see this is the origin and arising of suffering. He comes to directly know and unmistakably see this is the very cessation of suffering. He comes to directly know and unmistakably see this is the path itself that leads to the ending of suffering. Furthermore, he comes to directly know and unmistakably see these are the asavas, the heart's contaminants, the influx. He comes to directly know and unmistakably see this is the origin and arising of the asavas, the heart's contaminants. He comes to directly know and unmistakably see. This is the very cessation of the asavas. And he comes to directly know and unmistakably see that this is the path itself that leads to the ending of the asavas, the heart's contaminants. This is the final usage of the mechanism, the wonderful formula called the Four Noble Truths. You have just disassembled reality. Existence is falling apart in front of your eyes. The whole thing, the matrix, is unfolding. Thus, by seeing and understanding the truth of this, the bhikkhu is then fully released from the contaminant of sensuality. Similarly, he is fully released from the contaminant of becoming, and he is fully released from the contaminant of ignorance. Kamasava, I mentioned earlier, bhavasava, and avijjasava. And by knowing viscerally for himself and beyond the shadow of a doubt, he comes to the very unmistakable and unprecedented realization: I am now finally released indeed. Thus, he attains to the noble end of the holy life, as he finally understands it for himself in this very birth, in the here and now, knowing it for sure with direct understanding. Birth is now finally destroyed. The holy life has been fully lived, with its goal achieved. There is no more coming back to any state of becoming. Imagine Kevaḍḍha. There was a pool of water in a secluded place that was pristine and clear, utterly pure and with perfect visibility all the way down to its bottom. Then, someone with excellent eyesight standing at its edge on dry land looks down into the water, and he can clearly see the different shells, pebbles, and rocks of different colors, as well as schools of fish swimming and comfortably living and frolicking in it. Now, that man would start thinking to himself, this lovely pool in this secluded place is so pristine and clear, utterly pure and with perfect visibility all the way down to its bottom, whereby, while I stand at its edge and on dry land, looking down into it, I can clearly see the different shells, pebbles, and rocks of different colors, as well as schools of fish swimming and comfortably living and frolicking in it. Now, in just the same manner, Kevaḍḍha, when the bhikkhu's mind becomes fully collected and stable, well concentrated, bright in its purity, stainless, malleable, and wieldy, absent of any imperfections, etc., he then directs it towards the knowledge of the destruction of the heart's contaminants. To this end, given the work he has already done, his heart is fully released. This also, Kevaḍḍha, is what is meant by the miracle of instruction. These, therefore, Kevaḍḍha, are the three types of miraculous feats that I have personally realized and experienced myself, while also teaching them to my students. That's the Buddha's subtle way of saying it. I have all of these, and I teach them and have taught them to my students. Hence, they're part of the miracle of instruction. Such an opportunity to rejoice, both humans and devas, for the fact that we have this Dhamma still. So beautiful. We'll continue the last section of the sutta next week. So I hope this does give you thorough understanding. Remember, one of the reasons why I took on this task of doing this Sutta exploration series several years ago was to bring out these suttas, because they were collecting dust in the world, albeit more and more people were at least posting some of the suttas here and there, or PDFs, or some They were presented in one language versus another, but there has been this terrible need for these and many of the suttas that we've already covered and will be covering in the future if I have the strength and ability to, is to change the life and the practice that we have and the life that we lead, because these suttas directly help. That's why they were collecting dust, because they're not the popular suttas. When you go to temples, when you do take part in some ceremonies, these are not discussed. The Dhamma dies. Years ago, I mentioned this and some people were upset. The Dhamma is dying in the temples, Buddhist temples, in our lives, because we permit that. We allow that to happen. Now, you're not going to go on a angry rampage and telling bhikkhus or abbots and etc. to change their lifestyle necessarily. You have to primarily work on yourself. The temple is simply there for social gatherings. Remember that. To feel cozy about something, to have an identity, and it serves a purpose. It's a lovely purpose, but it doesn't go beyond that. It's about an inch or two off the ground as far as the Dhamma is concerned. The Dhamma takes you all the way to the highest highs of understanding, of insight. After all, that is who you have control over, your own life and how you live it, how you practice the Dhamma to improve your life, to bring joy, to bring meaning, to bring depth of understanding, to bring freedom. Not for the sake of going to the other life over there because, I want to be born there, so I'll end up for the rest of ever there. There is no such thing. We will find that clearly demonstrated next week when the Buddha talks about that bhikkhu who goes looking for such a place. No. The freedom that comes from breaking the chains of craving, of wanting, no matter how sublime the wanting is. We have to do work, and that's it. But during the work, it doesn't have to be a hateful work. It doesn't have to be done with compulsion, with so much strain. No. Look at the jhanas we went over today. There's always joy in there somewhere, in some form. There's always this sense of contentment opening up. There's a pleasant experience of understanding. And when you come out of it with the right insights developing in you through the satipatthana, you are no longer the same person you were going in. That's why it's self-transformative. That's why you are the only evidence that you could ask for. Of course, the world around you will also resonate that. You will see the world in a different light. You will sleep differently. You will wake up differently while still alive. And alive is the time, when we are alive, that is the time for us to really taste the Dhamma, not some other realm. That's why we are not interested in rebirth in any other realm, because if we are reborn in other realms, guess what? We have opened the floodgates of aging, decay, and death for us to re-experience. That's why we do not want rebirth into any other realms. Because the Buddha wanted us to end it, to end birth altogether. Why? Because of birth, we have suffering, loss of loved ones. You thought this life was difficult? Imagine yourself being born in a realm where there is the difficulties that you must face, plus the absence of Dhamma. No instruction, no miracle of instruction waiting for you. That is hellish. Nobody wants to be born in a place like that. Now we have it, though. Now we can celebrate through our practice. And I will stop here and see if there are any thoughts, comments, questions. Yes, is there a question? Okay. Oh, yes, Aptika.
So this is not a question, it's more like an observation that there are so many suttas, almost every suttas, that the Buddha's technique of the purification of the mind, um, like every other people asking him any other question, he would just guide it through the jhanas and also the last three knowledge. So I find that I mean, before this, I wouldn't know his technique, right? So and it's been kept like under the dark. So it's just like almost every suttas, and it is so clear the step by step purification of the mind. He just guide you through. So I, I, I'm very blessed to know. It's not esoteric. It's nothing secretive. It's not a secret teaching like other denomination and sectarian. So I find it. It's just nobody knows. So yes. And I'm very affected by this suttas. I was very clear the moment he said like the mind is bright and all so wonderful. It gives me goosebumps. So
Well, I hope we're changing that, because you know this. You are seeing this, all of you here, and by extension, whoever is listening to this. Now your baton is being passed on to you, in a sense. So you have no excuse now not to practice, because it's there. You see, yes, there is nothing metaphysical in that sense. There's nothing esoteric, as you said, in the Dhamma. It's very real. It's very present. It's very personal in that sense. Pachatang veditabo vinyuhi, Lord Buddha says. It is to be realized by the wise, by themselves, for themselves. You are tasting something so incredible, let's say, and then you go somewhere or people show up and you describe that thing that you tasted to them, to no avail. You won't succeed, no matter how hard you try, so long as they have not done the work. They have not at least reached over for that fruit, let's say, to go get it themselves, to taste it themselves. Unless they've done that, then it's impossible for them to know what you know. Now, you mentioned about the jhanas, or the step-by-step guide that the Buddha gives us, so beautifully delineated, something which you do not find anywhere else in any tradition out there. This was one of the things that attracted me to Buddhism, even in my teens, in a world where there was no Buddhism as such. A world that it was dark. It was dark for me, because I was seeing the world around me, as I mentioned earlier, things that I saw to be unfair, things that didn't make sense. But I wanted a formula. I wanted a step-by-step guide. And I said, if I'm born, if I have that curiosity, if I'm looking for answers, I'm looking for a mechanism, then there has to be the mechanism. There has to be. And that is what we see also in the Buddha mentioning in the Udana. He says, if there was not the deathless, then it would be impossible for us to even be talking about it, to even be aware of it, because we would be stuck in that which is ruled by death, aging. But because of the fact that there is the deathless, there is the signless, there is true non-manifestative consciousness, there's nibbana, there's freedom, then we can actually work towards it, because there is. Now, if a person is not practicing the Dhamma proper, remember, jhanas are good when you take it in the right context, when you work with it for the right reasons, in the right way, of course, and you don't turn it into another badge or stripes on your shoulder to feel good about yourself or tell others about it, some type of an attainment type of a thing. If you're not doing any of those crazy things, but you're actually using it as a rung on a ladder to go higher and higher in understanding, in unlayering the onion, removing those layers of reality, seeing things as they are. When you practice that, it's, as you pointed out, it's remarkable. It gives you a unique perspective. Now, that perspective comes with effort. If you have places, temples, or teachers who are not teaching this, who are not going over the suttas, and the Buddha warned us about this. He said, in the future, there will be, the monks will not be interested in teaching you the suttas that really basically matter for directly of the freedom to be able to cut yourself free from samsara. In the future, there will be no interest by the bhikkhus to pursue, to study, to recite, to memorize, to teach, to practice especially the suttas that deal with sunyata, emptiness. And lo and behold, today, if you mentioned sunyata in any traditional Theravadan temple or gathering, they will immediately say, you're bringing in future things from that were not taught by the Buddha. They actually believe that. Or it's from Mahayana or somewhere else, they say. No. Before the Mahayana even showed up on the map, the Buddha was talking, explaining sunyata, and guiding the practitioner through techniques that give the person the understanding and realization of sunyata. I mean, you don't have to be a philosopher. That's another example of suttas that have been thrown under the bus or collecting dust, but we're changing that. And these recordings will help. And the PDFs of this and other suttas we've covered are already all on the website and mindrelease.com. And I am not, by the way, on side note, I used to do a lot of uploads after I translated suttas and narrate them, such as the Anguttara Nikayas were done. Samyutta Nikaya is what I'm working on, was working on actually, to narrate and then post after translation. But during the last 5-6 months, I've been focusing my energy on the proofreading and finishing up the touches on the Anguttara Nikaya. So that hopefully within the next month or so, maybe 2 months, we will have the first uploaded, the entire Anguttara Nikaya's first chapter, the book of the ones. So the whole thing is done, but proofreading takes a long time. because I did the translations over a course of 7 years while I was tossed around different parts of the world, airport to airport. I was sitting and doing the translation in airport lobbies and train stations and things. So all putting that together takes a lot of effort. So it's done, but the proofreading is taking a while. So I can't wait for that to be available for the masses, because it comes back to what you were saying. They're so beautiful. They're so systematically laid out. And it's a shame for us to be living in a world where the Dhamma is available, but we are not accessing it. So this is my effort at making it accessible more and more every day. That's why we do this. So thanks to your support, of course, financial and every other support possible. And if there are no more questions, I will have us move to transferring the merits. Okay. Akasatha Chubumata Deva Nagamahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakhantu Lokasasanam. Akasatha Chubumata Deva Nagamahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakhantu Desanam. Akasatha Chubumata Deva Nagamahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakhantu Mamparanti. So, may you all be blessed with the blessings of the Triple Gem, you and all your loved ones, your families. May your progress continuously, steadily go on, continue until you attain the highest Magga, Phala, Nibbana, supreme path, fruits, Nibbana, supreme. May all the merits be shared with all beings of such wonderful, well-lived life with all. Until next time, Kevaḍḍha.